All right, so you send over a whole stack of ESL textbooks. Seems like you're either learning English yourself or helping someone who is. So let's dive into these and see what we can uncover.
Absolutely. And it's not just your typical grammar rules and vocabulary lists. We're talking about real conversations, practical scenarios, the kind of stuff ESL teachers actually use in the classroom.
So our mission today is to pull out those golden nuggets of knowledge, the things that'll make a real difference for a beginning English learner. And who knows, maybe we'll even find a few aha moments for those of us who think we've mastered the language.
I'm sure we will. It's amazing how much we take for granted when it comes to our native language.
Exactly. So we're starting with chapter 1, aptly titled Greetings and Introductions. Now, on the surface, it seems pretty basic, right? Hello, goodbye, what's your name? But there's this one detail that I found really clever.
Oh, you mean how they teach you to actually spell your name aloud using the English alphabet?
Yes. It seems so obvious, but think about it. In those early stages of learning a language, being able to clearly communicate your name is absolutely essential. It's the foundation of any introduction.
It's like giving someone the key to unlock your identity in this new linguistic world.
Love that analogy. And the chapter goes beyond just basic greetings. It uses these fun role-playing scenarios, putting you right in the situation of walking into an ESL classroom for the first day.
I can imagine it now. You're surrounded by new faces, everyone's a little nervous, and then you have to find the courage to introduce yourself, maybe even strike up a conversation.
Exactly. It's not just about what to say, but how to say it. And that brings us to the next fascinating element in Chapter 1, pronunciation. They dive straight into syllables.
Ah, syllables, the building blocks of spoken language. Remember clapping along to songs as a kid? English syllables work that way too, each beat carrying a part of the word.
And it's not just about speaking clearly. Understanding syllables is crucial for deciphering spoken English, especially for beginners who are still getting used to the rhythm and flow of the language.
The book even has these listening exercises where you have to identify the odd word out based on syllable count. It's like a little puzzle that trains your ear to hear those subtle differences.
Very clever. Now, I know we said we wouldn't get too technical, but Chapter 1 also introduces some fundamental grammar concepts. We're talking verb-to-be subject pronouns like I, you, he, she, and all those essential building blocks.
What I appreciate is how they present these concepts. They break down the affirmative, negative, and question forms, showing you the patterns of the language. So you don't just memorize rules, you actually understand how they work.
And they introduce possessive adjectives like my and your,
Mhm.
which, let's be honest, can trip up even more advanced learners sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. It's so easy to get those mixed up, especially in the beginning.
Now, here's where things get really interesting. Chapter 1 wraps up with vocabulary focused on the classroom itself. Wall, projector, screen. Words you need right away to participate and function in your new learning environment.
It's like they're giving you the tools to navigate this new space, to feel comfortable and confident from day one. And they encourage you to find and name objects in your own classroom, which I think is a fantastic way to make it personal and interactive.
Absolutely. Okay, are you ready to expand our horizons a bit? We're moving on to Chapter 2, places and people.
Ah, yes. We're stepping out of the classroom and into the wider world. This chapter goes beyond simple greetings and starts to build complexity by introducing nationality and language.
For example, they introduce a character named Helen, who is American from Miami, and her first language is English. Such a simple sentence, but it packs in so much information.
It's like a mini biography, and it opens up a whole world of possibilities for conversation. You can start asking questions like, where are you from? What language do you speak? And suddenly you're not just exchanging greetings, you're building connections.
And this chapter doesn't shy away from the fun stuff either. There's an activity where students have to describe people's appearances, which is a great way to practice using adjectives. But there's a deeper layer to it as well.
Oh, absolutely. Chapter 2's pronunciation section dives into long and short vowels. You know the difference between cap and cape, or kit and kite? These subtle distinctions are huge for understanding and being understood.
And to really drive that point home, they have a partner activity where one person says a word and the other has to determine if it's the long or short vowel version. It's practical, interactive, and a bit of a challenge, which keeps things engaging.
Speaking of challenges, let's talk about the grammar focus in Chapter 2, the simple present tense. This is where we start talking about routines, habits, facts, things like I wake up at 7 a.m.
Yeah.
or water boils at 100 degrees Celsius.
And the book does a great job of breaking it down. They teach you how to form affirmative, negative, and question sentences. And they even tackle those tricky S's endings for third-person singular verbs.
It's quite comprehensive. And to round out the chapter, they introduce vocabulary related to the weather. Think about it. Talking about the weather is a universal icebreaker, a staple of small talk in any language.
So true. They cover words like sunny, rainy, hot, cold, but also clothing items like jacket, boots, umbrella. It really highlights how language learning is all about connecting to real-world situations, making it more engaging and immediately useful.
I'm noticing a pattern here. Each chapter seems to build upon the previous one, adding new layers of complexity, while staying grounded in practical, everyday scenarios.
You're absolutely right. It's like they're building a house brick by brick, starting with the foundation, and gradually working their way up to something more intricate and impressive.
And that's what makes these textbooks so effective. They're not just about learning isolated grammar points or memorizing vocabulary lists, but about acquiring the language in a way that's relevant to the learner's life.
Okay, ready to step inside this house we're building. We're moving on to Chapter 3, Everyday Activities and Weekly Routines. This is where things get even more relatable, talking about how you get to work or school, your daily schedule, that kind of thing.
They even have a brilliant exercise where you compare your schedule to someone else's. It's a fantastic way to build conversational skills and practice using those time-related prepositions like at, on, and in.
And the grammar focus in this chapter, the present progressive tense. This is for actions happening right now in the present moment. Things like, I am studying, she is cooking.
Of course, they don't forget to highlight those sometimes trickying endings. Coming, taking, running. It's all about mastering those subtle details that make your English sound more natural and fluent.
Ready for Chapter 4? It's homes and workplaces. Here we delve into describing living spaces and jobs. We get introduced to useful vocabulary like bedroom, bathroom, living room, kitchen, and various job titles.
One activity that really stood out to me was where students describe their homes while their partner draws it. What a fun and creative way to test comprehension and practice those descriptive words.
Absolutely. And it brings a visual element to the learning process, which can be really helpful for those who learn best through visual aids.
Speaking of visual aids, I'm picturing all this vocabulary coming to life. It's like we're walking through someone's home, picturing the layout, the furniture, maybe even imagining the smells coming from the kitchen.
I love that. You're really painting a picture for our listeners.
Yeah.
Now let's move on to Chapter 5, Food and Health. This one covers everything from eating habits to giving advice on staying healthy. And what I found particularly insightful is how they teach you to express your own preferences when it comes to food. It's not just about learning the names of different dishes. It's about being able to say, I love pasta, or I can't stand spicy food.
It's about finding your voice, expressing your own tastes and opinions, even if it's as simple as talking about your favorite breakfast cereal. And they introduce the use of should and should not for giving advice, which is another crucial element of communication, especially when it comes to health.
Like saying, hey, if you want to stay healthy, you should eat plenty of fruits and vegetables, but you should probably skip that extra slice of cake. Practical advice woven into the language lessons.
I love it. Me too. It's all about making those connections between language and real life. And speaking of real life, Chapter 6 is all about personal information and hobbies. Finally, a chance to talk about the things we enjoy doing.
Right. It's like the textbooks are saying, okay, you've learned the basics, now let's have some fun and talk about what makes you tick. This is where learners can really start to express their individuality, their passions, their unique quirks.
And we see a new grammar concept introduced here. The difference between can and could for abilities. For example, I can play guitar, but I couldn't before. It's about showing how our abilities evolve over time, how we learn and grow.
It's like a little window into our personal journeys, the skills we've acquired, the challenges we've overcome. And then in Chapter 7, shopping and past activities, we embark on a journey through time.
Ah, yes. We're stepping into the realm of past experiences, recounting memories, sharing stories of our adventures. This chapter focuses on travel and uses the simple past tense to describe those past trips. I went to the beach, I saw the Statue of Liberty.
It's like flipping through a photo album, reliving those special moments, bringing the past to life through language. And of course, no travel experience is complete without a little shopping, so they also cover vocabulary related to that.
From souvenirs to necessities, it's all there. And finally, we reach Chapter 8, Future Plans and Invitations. Time to look ahead, to dream, to imagine the possibilities that lie before us.
This chapter is all about anticipation, excitement, making plans, extending invitations. They teach you how to use be going to and will to talk about upcoming events. Things like, I'm going to visit my family, or we will have a party.
And of course, they include a vocabulary for common events like weddings, honeymoons, retirement parties, like they're giving you the language tools to navigate these important milestones in social situations.
Exactly. Now let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture here. One thing that really struck me as we were going through these textbooks was how much emphasis they place on pronunciation right from the beginning.
Absolutely. It's not just an afterthought. It's woven into the fabric of the lessons. That focus on syllables in Chapter 1, for instance, is crucial. Even native speakers can benefit from revisiting these fundamentals. It's like tuning a musical instrument, making sure each note is clear and resonant.
And then there are those subtle vowel distinctions we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
The long and short vowels in Chapter 2. It's something we often take for granted. But those tiny differences in sound can completely change the meaning of a word.
Think about it: cap versus cape, kit versus kite. These are simple words, but mispronouncing them can lead to confusion and misunderstandings. These textbooks really highlight the importance of paying attention to these seemingly small details.
Another thing that impressed me was how clear and concise the grammar explanations were. They managed to avoid all that technical jargon and present the concepts in a way that's easy to grasp, even for someone who's never studied English grammar before.
That's the hallmark of good teaching materials. They take complex ideas and break them down into manageable chunks, making the learning process more accessible and less intimidating. It's like taking a bite-sized piece of a delicious cake instead of trying to swallow the whole thing at once.
And I love how they integrate those grammar points into real conversations and activities. It's not just about memorizing rules in isolation. It's about seeing how those rules come to life in everyday communication.
Precisely. And that's what makes language learning so much more effective. It's about connecting those abstract grammar concepts to real-world scenarios, making the learning process more meaningful and engaging. It's not just about learning a language, it's about learning to live in that language.
Okay, so we've talked about the big picture. Now let's zoom in on some specific examples that really stood out to me. Remember that activity in Chapter 1 where you have to spell your name aloud using the English alphabet?
Such a simple activity, but so brilliant. It really drives home the importance of being able to communicate your name clearly, especially in those early stages of language learning.
Right. And then in Chapter 2, there's that activity where students have to describe people's appearances. It's not just a fun way to practice using adjectives, it's also a great way to practice those long and short vowel sounds we were talking about.
And it encourages observation and attention to detail, which are important skills for language learners to develop. Plus, it's a fun way to interact with classmates and maybe even learn a little bit about different cultures and perceptions of beauty.
I also loved the exercise in Chapter 3 where you compare your daily schedule to someone else's. It's such a simple concept, but it's a perfect example of how these textbooks promote real-world communication.
It's not just about reciting vocabulary or conjugating verbs in a vacuum. It's about using the language to interact, share information, connect with others. And it can lead to some really interesting conversations about cultural differences in daily routines and lifestyles.
Absolutely. And let's not forget those activities in Chapter 4 where students have to describe their homes while their partners draw them.
That one's a classic. It's a fantastic way to combine language learning with creativity and a bit of humor. Plus, it reinforces those vocabulary words related to living spaces and encourages learners to think about the details that make their homes unique.
Okay, one more example. The section in Chapter 5 about giving advice on staying healthy. It's such an important topic, and the book does a great job of presenting it in a clear and practical way.
And it introduces the use of should and should not, which are essential for expressing opinions and giving recommendations in English. But it also opens up a discussion about cultural differences and approaches to health and well-being, which I think is really valuable.
So what does all of this mean for you, the listener? Well, if you're learning English, these textbooks offer a fantastic foundation. They cover all the essentials: greetings, introductions, pronunciation, basic grammar, and everyday vocabulary.
And what's truly remarkable is that they managed to do so in a way that's both comprehensive and engaging. The teen books use real conversations, interactive activities, and practical scenarios to make the learning process both effective and enjoyable. It's like they've cracked the code to making language learning fun and accessible.
Even if you're already fluent in English, I think these textbooks offer valuable insights. They remind us of the importance of clear pronunciation, those subtle vowel distinctions, and the power of using grammar accurately.
It's a refreshing deep dive into the fundamentals of the language, and it serves as a reminder that there's always more to learn, even where it comes to something as familiar as our own native language.
Now let's delve into some of those nuances that can sometimes trip up even experienced English speakers. For example, did you know that even simple verbs like do, does, is, and are can sound completely different when used in their negative forms?
It's true. The difference between do and don't, or is and isn't, can be quite subtle, but it's crucial for understanding meaning, and it's something that these textbooks address directly, providing clear explanations and plenty of practice opportunities.
They also highlight those sometimes tricky cusses endings for third-person singular verbs in the simple present tense. It's something that native speakers often do automatically. But for English learners, it's a rule that needs to be learned and practiced.
And let's not forget those sometimes tricky egging endings for verbs in the present progressive tense. Coming, taking, running. These are all words that English learners need to practice to really master those sounds.
Speaking of mastering sounds, these textbooks introduce the concept of linking, which is how we often combine the last sound of one word with the beginning sound of the next word in a sentence. For example, an apartment might sound like a natter apartment, or I got hired might sound like I go tired.
It's a subtle feature of spoken English that can be challenging for learners to grasp, but it's essential for understanding natural flowing speech. And these textbooks provide clear explanations and practice exercises to help learners develop the skill.
They also delve into reduced forms of common words and phrases, like gonna for going to, wanna for want to, and hafta for have to. These reduced forms are everywhere in spoken English, so understanding them is crucial for comprehension.
It's like they're giving you a secret decoder ring to unlock the mysteries of everyday conversations. And speaking of unlocking mysteries, remember those compound nouns we mentioned earlier? Well, it turns out there's more to them than meets the eye.
You mean how we often stress the first word in a compound noun? Like in seafood, the emphasis is on sea, and in healthcare, the emphasis is on health. It's a subtle pronunciation point, but it makes a big difference in how native speakers perceive these words.
Exactly, and it's something that English learners can use to their advantage to sound more natural and fluent. It's all about those subtle cues that signal to native speakers that you really understand the nuances of the language.
Okay, are you ready to level up your English skills even further? Let's explore some advanced concepts that these textbooks touch upon. One that I found particularly fascinating was the concept of intonation, the rise and fall of our voice when we speak.
Intonation is like the music of language. It adds another layer of meaning to our words, conveying emotions, emphasis, even subtle hints of sarcasm or humor.
And these textbooks explain how different types of questions have different intonation patterns. For example, yes-no questions tend to have a rising intonation at the end, while information questions, those that start with who, what, when, where, or why, tend to have a falling intonation.
It's a subtle but important aspect of spoken English, and mastering it can make a big difference in how you're perceived by native speakers. It's like the difference between hitting a note perfectly or slightly off key. It might not be a huge deal, but it can make all the difference in creating a harmonious flow.
These textbooks also introduce the concept of reduced forms for common phrases like kind of, sort of, and lots of.
You mean how they're often pronounced as kinda, sorta, and lotsa in casual speech? It's important for English learners to be aware of these reduced forms because they're extremely common in everyday conversations. Hearing them can be jarring if you're not prepared.
Exactly. And it's not just about understanding these reduced forms when you hear them. It's also about being able to use them appropriately in your own speech to sound more natural and fluent. Now, one thing that really stood out to me as we were going through these textbooks was how they weave cultural insights into the language lessons.
Yes, they go beyond simply teaching vocabulary and grammar and introduce learners to different customs, traditions, and ways of thinking. It's about understanding that language is not just a set of rules. It's a reflection of culture, history, and the human experience.
For example, in the chapter on greetings and introductions, they discuss how different cultures have different norms for physical contact, eye contact, and personal space. What might be considered polite in one culture could be seen as rude or intrusive in another.
And in the chapter on food and health, they talk about different dietary customs around the world, highlighting the diversity of human experience and how our food choices are often shaped by cultural traditions and beliefs. It's all about broadening perspectives and fostering empathy and understanding.
It's this kind of cultural awareness that truly enriches the language learning journey. It's about understanding not just the words, but also the people and the world behind those words. It's about seeing language as a bridge that connects us to different cultures and perspectives.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another important aspect of these textbooks, the practical tips and strategies they offer for English learners. One thing they emphasize is the importance of active listening.
That means not just hearing the words, but truly paying attention to the meaning, the intonation, the nonverbal cues. It's about engaging with the language on multiple levels, not just passively absorbing it.
They also encourage learners to practice speaking as much as possible, even if they're afraid of making mistakes. It's about getting comfortable with the sounds, the rhythm, the flow of the language. The more you practice, the more confident and fluent you'll become.
And they suggest finding opportunities to interact with native speakers, whether it's through conversation groups, language exchange partners, or simply striking up conversations with people in your community. It's about immersing yourself in the language and putting what you've learned into practice in real-world situations.
They also remind learners to be patient with themselves. Learning a new language takes time and effort. It's a journey, not a destination. And it's a journey that's filled with challenges and rewards along the way. The key is to enjoy the process, celebrate the small victories, and never give up on your goals.
Now, these textbooks are a treasure trove of resources. But there's one particular feature that I found especially helpful for solidifying what you've learned.
The practice exercises right. Each chapter is packed with them, and they're designed to reinforce the grammar, vocabulary, and pronunciation points that have been covered. It's like having a personal trainer for your English skills.
Exactly. And what's great is that they offer a variety of activities catering to different learning styles. There are listening exercises, speaking activities, writing prompts, and even games and puzzles. It's all about providing learners with multiple ways to engage with the material and make it their own. And they also include answer keys for most of the exercises, so you can check your understanding and track your progress.
It's like having a built-in tutor right there in the book. Now, while these textbooks are incredibly comprehensive, there's one thing that really got me thinking.
You mean how they focus almost exclusively on spoken English?
You read my mind, and that raises an interesting question. How does written English differ from spoken English?
It's a great point. It really is like comparing a lively conversation to a well-crafted essay. They both use English, but the style, the tone, even the grammar can be quite different.
It really is. Think of spoken English as a flowing river adapting to the curves and contours of the landscape. It's flexible, spontaneous, full of subtle nuances, and sometimes it even meanders off in unexpected directions.
Whereas written English is more like a carefully constructed bridge with precise measurements, a deliberate structure, and a clear destination in mind.
That's a brilliant analogy. Spoken English allows for contractions, slang, even incomplete sentences. It relies heavily on intonation, facial expressions, and body language to convey meaning. It's all about the immediacy and the connection of the moment.
While written English tends to be more grammatically precise, with complete sentences, proper punctuation, and a more formal tone. It's about clarity, precision, and creating a lasting record of our thoughts and ideas.
And of course, the choice of vocabulary often differs between spoken and written English.
In spoken English, we tend to use simpler, more everyday words. It's all about getting the message across quickly and efficiently. While in written English, we have the time and space to use more complex, nuanced vocabulary, to paint a richer picture with our words.
It's all about choosing the right tool for the job. Spoken English for those casual conversations, those spontaneous moments of connection. Written English for those more formal communications, those times when we need to be clear, concise, and leave a lasting impression.
Now, here's a final thought to ponder as you continue your language journey. As technology continues to evolve, how might these differences between spoken and written English become even more pronounced? Will we see new forms of language emerge, new ways of communicating? It's fascinating to think about how our digital world is shaping the way we use and interact with language.
It is. Language is a living, breathing entity. It's constantly evolving, shaped by the ways we interact with the world around us. And as technology continues to blur the lines between spoken and written communication, it'll be fascinating to see how English adapts and transforms.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of ESL textbooks. We hope you've enjoyed this exploration of English fundamentals, whether you're a beginner or a seasoned speaker.
Remember, language learning is a journey, not a destination. So be curious, be patient, and most importantly, have fun with it. Embrace those moments of discovery, those aha moments when things click into place.
And who knows, maybe you'll even discover some hidden treasures in your own native language along the way.